testimony, I want to introduce to you someone else that has become a good friend and one of the funniest guys actually I've ever met. I wouldn't have ever thought that I would be saying that Robert Spencer is one of the funniest guys that I've ever met, but he actually is. And part of that is, I can tell you, Mark and I do this full time, as does Mr. Spencer. It's a very humorless topic that we deal with. Radical Islam, we could make jokes, but it's a pretty dark topic. So this guy is funny. Anyway, beyond that, he's also a best-selling author. He's written 2 New York Times bestsellers. He's written another 9 or 10 books, 11 books. In fact, this evening there's a book out here that I think we're taking orders for because we actually sold out last night. It hasn't hit Amazon. It hasn't hit Barnes & Noble, any of that kind of stuff. It's a phenomenal book. What's that? We have like one here, and I think that's the last one. Anyway, we are taking orders out in the lobby. So, yeah, they'll definitely be signed and sent. All right, do you have Robert's signature down pretty good? Okay. So that being said, not only is he a best-selling author, but I think something that I've found interesting about him, that most people, if you Google Roberts, you can find out all kinds of interesting things that you may not have known about Robert Spencer. Some not true, and many of which are not true, absolutely. But one thing that is true is he was actually banned from going to the UK. Now, the fact that a country would ban an individual from coming to that country, not based on any criminal behavior. Anyway, he'll get into that. I find it a fascinating topic, and I know he'll delve into it a little bit. But beyond that, we're thrilled to death to have Robert Spencer here with us tonight. It's a real privilege to have him. So, my friend, Robert Spencer.
Thank you very much. I feel as if it's incumbent upon me to be funny now. And there is actually one way that we can tie all these threads together, because we just heard this very riveting testimony from Dr. Mark Christian that is a glimpse into a world that is so very different from the one in which we live. And that does remind me of a joke, actually, of a little boy, a Muslim boy, 5 years old, and he's in the supermarket with his mother. And as these things will happen, he gets separated from her. And so eventually he's weeping and makes his way to the store manager, and the store manager says, "What's your name, little boy?" And he says, "Muhammad." And, "Well, Muhammad, can you tell us what your mommy looks like?" And he looks up at the store manager and he says, "I have no idea." So it is, here again, a very different world. And yet it is very important to understand that what you just heard about this vicious hostility that Mark encountered from his loving parents, previously loving parents, only because he had converted from Islam to Christianity, is not something that is eccentric or out of the ordinary. It is not something that is the invention of a tiny minority of extremists who have twisted and hijacked the religion of peace. It is something that is actually mainstream in Islam. Chapter 4, verse 89 of the Quran, the holy book of Islam, says that if there are those who are with you and they turn renegade, then slay them wherever you find them. If they turn renegade, then slay them wherever you find them. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, who is the excellent example of conduct, according to the Quran, chapter 33, verse 21, he is the supreme model to emulate. That is very important to understand that when they say he's the excellent example to emulate, that is absolute. If Muhammad did it, it's right. If Muhammad said it, believe it. If Muhammad did it, imitate it. There is nothing that Muhammad did that is wrong as far as Islam is concerned, because the Quran calls him the excellent example, and without any qualification. So, Muhammad said, if anybody changes his religion, kill him. If anybody changes his religion, kill him. If he leaves Islam, kill him. Every last convert from Islam to Christianity, or from Islam to anything, anyone who leaves Islam is under a perpetual death sentence. It may never happen. We can pray to God that it will never happen. But it is always a possibility that a Muslim who leaves Islam could be encountered by somebody who knows that that is the teaching of Islam, believes it to be the word of God, and acts upon it. And so what happened to Mark actually probably would have been much worse had he been at home and walked into his parents' house and said, "Guess what, Mom and Dad? I converted to Christianity." He might not have walked out again. As he calls up, he gets the more moderate approach, and that is that they tell him they're looking forward to killing him. But they probably would if they had the opportunity, because if they don't, then they themselves will be punished by Allah. So it is very important to understand the Quran and Muhammad, those are the highest authorities in Islam. So the way Mark's parents were acting was absolutely mainstream. And that brings us to the topic that is tonight's topic, the Muslim Brotherhood in the Heartland, which is kind of an odd topic if you think about it, because we think of them, if you've heard of the Muslim Brotherhood, you've probably heard about it in the last few years as an Egyptian political party and something that's not really anything to worry about. After all, Barack Obama loves the Muslim Brotherhood. On June 4th, 2009, Barack Obama went to Cairo to make a major speech at Al-Azhar University, which is the foremost institution in Sunni Islam. And he was going to make this speech of outreach to the Muslim world that was going to heal all the terrible breach between the Islamic world and the United States and usher in a new era of peace and harmony between Muslim countries and the United States. And you see how well it's worked. But Barack Obama, when he did that, Hosni Mubarak was still the president of Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood was an outlawed organization. It was against the law to be a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And Barack Obama insisted that Muslim Brotherhood leaders be present at his speech in Cairo. And Mubarak said, "Fine, you can have Muslim Brotherhood leaders at your speech, and then I will not be there, because I'm not going to be in a room with this outlawed organization," which is perfectly reasonable. It was actually a grave insult that Obama asked for that, because it was an insult to the sitting president of Egypt that he's saying, Obama was essentially saying, "I want this banned outlaw group that wants your head, I want them at my talk. And if it means you can't come, then fine, see you later." But that's what he did. And so the effect of it was that the Brotherhood was there at his talk, and Mubarak was not. And the message to the Egyptian people was, the United States backs the Muslim Brotherhood and not Mubarak. And the wheels were set in motion that culminated in the so-called Arab Spring that toppled Mubarak in January 2011. So closely do Egyptians identify Barack Obama with the Muslim Brotherhood that when they themselves had had enough of the Muslim Brotherhood after electing it to power and enduring Muslim Brotherhood rule for a year, they took to the streets in far greater numbers in the summer of 2013 than they had ever done during the so-called Arab Spring. And they toppled the Muslim Brotherhood regime. There were protesters in Tahrir Square in Cairo holding up signs saying, "Obama, stop supporting terrorism." Stop supporting terrorism. They meant stop supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, then we come to the topic for tonight, the Muslim Brotherhood in the Heartland. We are talking about terrorism, but we're also talking about something that is much more insidious than terrorism itself. And we are talking about the Muslim Brotherhood being present in the United States and in Nebraska. And we have to understand first, what does that mean? What do they want? What are they going to do when they're here? In the first place, as you'll hear later, and you probably have already heard to some degree, just in the news, in Omaha, not very far from here, we were just there last night, and we spoke about this same issue. They're building this wonderful new thing that's a new idea, the Tri-Faith Initiative. Have you heard of the Tri-Faith Initiative? That you're having a synagogue and a church and a mosque all together in one building. And so we all love each other. We're all children of Abraham. We're all the three sister Abrahamic faiths, and it's all wonderful. And what Corey and Mark have pointed out, and their group, the Global Faith Initiative, have pointed out, the Global Faith Institute have pointed out, is that on the website of the Tri-Faith Initiative are links to the Council on American Islamic Relations and the Islamic Society of North America, two of the most prominent and influential Muslim groups in the United States. And so it just looks like the broad mainstream, they're getting mainstream Muslim leaders like they're getting mainstream Jews and Christians. However, the Council on American Islamic Relations and the Islamic Society of North America are linked in various ways to the Muslim Brotherhood. And that link came out in an extraordinary document that also reveals the Muslim Brotherhood's agenda for the United States, what they plan to do here. A few years back, there was a charity, an Islamic charity in the United States called the the Holy Land Foundation. The Holy Land Foundation was the largest Islamic charity in the United States. And you usually, you think of charities, they're feeding the poor and taking care of orphans and such. But this charity was sending money to Hamas, the jihad terror group that wants to destroy Israel. And so that, of course, is illegal because the State Department lists Hamas on its list of terrorist groups. It's illegal to give money to a terrorist group. The Holy Land Foundation was shut down, put on trial, and several of its leaders are now in prison. And so that's all great. And even greater, very exciting if you're in my line of work, is that in 2007, when the Holy Land Foundation went on trial, it was revealed that FBI agents had raided their offices a few years back when the first allegations came out and had carted off these boxes of documents from the secret files of the Holy Land Foundation. And they found one of them was an extraordinary document that was the strategic goals for the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. It was never intended to be discussed here by you and me. It was never intended to be public. It was a private, internal document of Muslim Brotherhood leaders laying out their strategy for the United States. Now, it's a very interesting document in many, many ways. And you got my books up there. I wrote this book in 2008, Stealth Jihad, that examines that document at great length. But the main thing about it, for purposes of time here tonight, is that it says, and I quote, "The brothers must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within." Eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it falls and Allah's religion is victorious over other religions. Did you catch that? By their hands. By whose hands? By the hands of those in Western civilization. Exactly. By the hands of us. By our hands. That they were going to persuade us or bamboozle us or fool us into destroying ourselves, so that Allah's religion would be victorious over other religions, which is a political statement. It is a religious statement, but Islam is a political system as well as a religious one. And it has a political agenda, and that agenda is authoritarian and supremacist. And at variance with constitutional principles in numerous ways, notably the denial of the freedom of speech and the denial of the principle of the equality of rights of all people before the law. It institutionalizes discrimination against women, discrimination against non-Muslims and other groups. And they're going to make us do this. How are they going to do that? Well, the document talks about a civilization jihad and how they will essentially get into the West, and then by means of various deceptions and various stratagems, they will ultimately conquer and overwhelm the West. Now, what does this have to do with the Tri-Faith Initiative in Omaha? In the first place, it has a very direct connection because that document also listed the allied organizations in the United States that were playing out that agenda of eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and making us help. And among those groups were the Islamic Society of North America and the Islamic Association for Palestine. The Islamic Association for Palestine no longer exists. It was also shut down because it was also funding Hamas. But two of its core leaders, Jihad Watch and Omar Ahmed, founded a new group coming out of it and called it the Council on American Islamic Relations. So you have the Council on American Islamic Relations and the Islamic Society of North America, the two groups that are cited on the Tri-Faith Initiative website, and they are directly implicated in an internal Muslim Brotherhood document in being involved in this work of eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. Now you might say, well, this is all paranoid, hysterical conspiracy talk. But actually remember, that Muslim Brotherhood document was never intended to be seen by us. It was never intended to be released. It was just a strategy sheet so that people would understand the big picture and what they were trying to do. It also must be emphasized that that goal of eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and of fooling us into helping, where does that come from? Is it something the Muslim Brotherhood made up? Are they part of that tiny minority of extremists that's hijacked the religion of peace that we've all heard about from the president and others? Actually, what they are trying to do is core Islamic doctrine, core Quranic teaching. The Quran tells Muslims to fight against those who do not obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not forbid what He has forbidden, even if they are of the people of the book. The people of the book is the Quran's term for Jews and Christians and a few other groups. Until they pay the jizya, which is a tax, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So the agenda of the Muslims, as per the Quran, the holy book of Islam, is to fight against Jews and Christians until we submit, until we accept the overlordship of Islam, and pay a tax as a gesture of that submission. And in Islamic law, there were also various other kinds of humiliating and discriminatory regulations that mandated, that made sure that the Jews and Christians would always know that they were under the overlordship of the Muslims. They couldn't build new houses of worship or repair old ones, could not hold authority over Muslims, so they were relegated to the most menial jobs in society, had to step off the street if a Muslim was coming, like in the old Jim Crow South. All sorts of things to make sure that they knew that they were paying the price of rejecting Allah and Muhammad and the Quran. Now, this is an essentially political program, because obviously a government of the people and by the people and for the people, a government that derives its just laws from the consent of the governed, a government that guarantees that all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. That doesn't fit with a group of people that's subjugated and acknowledging the overlordship of another and is denied basic rights that the overlord group enjoys. Those two things are incompatible. And it's not, again, a tiny minority of extremists who holds to this view. I have here this Quran with me. I picked this up over in London. I'm not allowed to go to London anymore because of not anything that I have done. I haven't robbed any banks or cut off any babies' heads or anything of that kind. What happened was I said that Islam is unique among the religions of the world in having a developed doctrine and theology and legal system that mandates warfare against unbelievers, which is sort of like saying the sky is blue. It's just a fact. It is what it is. You can say, well, isn't it hateful that you say the sky is blue? You're bigoted and full of rage and hate, but it's just, sorry, the sky is blue. I didn't color it. There it is. Islam has a doctrine of warfare against unbelievers. I didn't make it up, but there it is. So the British Home Office, the Queen, and her minions, sent me this letter saying, you said this, so you can't come in. They are, in other words, totally capitulating to Islamic supremacist groups that don't want these truths to be known. So they are totally in the power of exactly the kind of phenomenon that I'm talking about, that Islamic law forbids non-Muslims to criticize Islam or to speak critically about it at all. Which means that if we were to carry that through, and we're facing a jihad terror threat, and jihadis are blowing up the Boston Marathon and shooting people at Fort Hood and flying planes into the World Trade Center, we can't say anything about it. Because they're grounding their actions in Islam, they're explaining them and justifying them by Islam, so we can't talk about it. This is what they want. And the effect of that will be that the jihad itself will then advance unimpeded and unopposed because nobody will be able to say anything about it. And that situation is very advanced in Britain. Now you can't talk about it. And those who do get barred from the country. But the fact is that I got this Quran in Britain. I got it at the Finsbury Park Mosque. I was over there in 2009, and I did what any American tourist would do when you're in London. I visited the local mosques. And I went to the Finsbury Park Mosque. The Finsbury Park Mosque was kind of notorious a few years back because there was an imam there. He's now in prison in the United States because he was trying to set up a jihad terrorist training camp in Portland, Oregon. And so he's awaiting trial for that. But he was, a few years back, the imam of this Finsbury Park Mosque in London. And he's kind of a fantastic character because he's very pious, he's very devout in his Islam, and so he takes very seriously the commands to fight against the unbelievers, to kill the renegades wherever you find them, and so on. And so in an excess of piety, he was grievously injured in a bomb explosion that he was making the bomb. And it blew up on him, so he blew off his hands. He has hooks for hands, and he's missing one eye. His name is Abu Hamza al-Masri. You may have heard of him. But in any case, he's gone now. He's in prison over here. And I went into his mosque, his former mosque, the Finsbury Park Mosque, and very nice fellow there started weighing me down with books. He didn't recognize me, and he was just trying to convert me to Islam. And he gave me this Quran, and I said to him, I hear you had a little trouble here a few years back. And he said, yes, but that's all done now, and we're all moderates here now. And so I got this moderate Quran. This moderate Quran is a really nice edition because it carries commentary by Sayyid Abu Allah Maududi, Maulana Maududi, who was a Pakistani Muslim politician and Islamic scholar. He died in 1979. And he's extraordinarily influential. I guarantee, if you have an Islamic bookstore here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm sure you like to go and browse over there, that you will find Maududi's writings. And if you go online to IslamicBookstore.com or Islamicity.com or any of the Islamic bookstores online where I love to shop, then you will find writings of Maududi. He's very mainstream and he's very influential. And he's not, in other words, part of that tiny minority of extremists. And so when I quote what I quoted, chapter 9, verse 29, fight against those who do not obey Allah and his messenger, do not forbid what he has forbidden, even if they are of the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Well, you can say, well, yeah, some extremists may take that out of context, but it really means give the unbelievers a hug, and there's nothing to worry about. So let's go to what Maududi says about it, because what Maududi says about it has far greater authority than what I do. Maududi actually is a Muslim, was a Muslim, very influential and powerful Muslim leader whose works are still widely read. And so in this moderate Quran that I got at the newly moderate mosque, this is the moderate interpretation of that verse, according to Maududi. The purpose for which the Muslims are required to fight. Note the required. It's not optional if you're a Muslim. You've got to fight. The purpose for which the Muslims are required to fight, it doesn't mean that all of them are going to, but they're required to, is not, as one might think, to compel the unbelievers into embracing Islam. In other words, they're not trying to force us to become Muslims. And that's actually something you hear quite often, that it's a little bit slick, it's a little bit deceptive, that Islamic spokesmen on TV will say, we're not forcing conversions. Islam forbids that. We're not trying to force people to become Muslim. Jihad has nothing to do with forcing people to become Muslim. And the people who hear it think, that means that it's really just an interior spiritual struggle. It's all about peace. It's not really about fighting at all. But that's not what they said. They said it was not to force people to become Muslim. Maududi explains what it is for. Rather, its purpose is to put an end to the suzerainty, the rule of the unbelievers, so that the latter are unable to rule over people. Political statement. The latter, unbelievers, are unable to rule over people. That means no non-Muslim government is safe or has any right to exist. The only legitimate government is an Islamic one. The authority to rule should only be vested in those who follow the true faith. Guess what the true faith is? Unbelievers who do not follow this true faith should live in a state of subordination. Anybody who becomes convinced of the truth of Islam may accept the faith of his or her own volition. The unbelievers are required to pay jizya, poll tax, in return for the security provided to them as dhimmis, protected people of an Islamic state. Jizya symbolizes the submission of the unbelievers to the suzerainty of Islam. Okay. Still, you might say, okay, so they have Muslim Brotherhood groups on their website, and the Muslim Brotherhood is dedicated to eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. And mainstream Islamic teachers say that non-Muslims have absolutely no right to head governments or to be leaders of states. But still, that doesn't mean that those nice guys down at the Tri-Faith Initiative, my friend Ahmed that I work with down at the plant, he's such a gentle soul, he would never hurt a fly. Surely you're not saying, and no, I'm not. There is Islamic teaching, and there is every individual person. And just as in Christianity, there are people who call themselves Christians, and then they don't do anything particularly Christian. They don't seem to know or either to care about what Christianity is really all about, so it is in Islam. Nonetheless, this initiative exists. And you see, when you're a Muslim and you are worshiping and praying, you recite the Quran. And ultimately, you recite all of it, and you just keep doing it. So when they're over there at the Tri-Faith Initiative, and they're going to be reciting the Quran, are they going to leave out the part about fight the unbelievers until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued? And you might say, well, no, they won't leave it out, but they just interpret it in a different way. Okay, and they're all sister Abrahamic faiths, and so they love the Jews and Christians there. Let's think about Abraham for a minute. You all know Abraham. You've all read Genesis 18, am I right? Abraham will become the father of many nations, right? And George W. Bush and Barack Obama both thought that was so great, and the fact that the faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all have a common Abrahamic root. They all look to Abraham as our father. They thought there was a great deal to be made of that, and they both sent out year after year congratulations to Muslims on their two great feasts in the Islamic calendar, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. Congratulations emphasizing that we all have this common father in Abraham, the father of many nations. And we should build a harmonious future on the basis of our shared respect for and shared heritage from Abraham. There's one thing, though, that George W. Bush and Barack Obama did not seem to take into account, and that is that Muslims don't read Genesis, they read the Quran. Abraham's in the Quran. Chapter 3, verse 67 of the Quran says, the Jews and Christians fight over Abraham. They're both ignorant. Abraham was not a Jew or a Christian. Abraham was a Muslim. Now, wait a minute. You may know enough about Islam to know that Abraham lived a couple thousand years before Christ, and Muhammad lived from 570 to 632 AD. So how could possibly Abraham have been a Muslim? This is mainstream Islam. This is ordinary Islam. That Moses, Abraham, Noah, Adam, David, Solomon, John the Baptist, and Jesus himself, they were all Muslim prophets who taught Islam. But then what happened was they all had wicked followers, and their wicked followers twisted and hijacked their teachings to create the false religions of Judaism and Christianity. The true religion of Abraham and Moses and Jesus and all the rest of them is Islam. And the true embodiment of their teachings is the Quran. Now this is invasion of the body snatchers ecumenism. This is Moses and Jesus as the pod people whose identities have been sucked out and replaced with Islamic prophet identities. And the fact of the matter is that the Quran avows this, and then it says that the Muslims are the best of people on earth, chapter 3, verse 110. While in chapter 98, verse 6, the unbelievers among the people of the book, that is, the Jews and Christians who do not convert to Islam, do not accept Muhammad as a prophet, do not become Muslim, they are the most vile of created beings. And they are followers of these false, twisted versions, these corruptions of the true teachings of Moses and Jesus. So there they are over there, at the Tri-Faith Initiative, all sitting together and having chicken and pita and hummus, and it's all wonderful. But you have these people whose core religious text says that they're the best of people, and the people they're sitting with are renegades and heretics, the most vile of created beings, like animals, according to chapter 8, verse 55 of the Quran, under the curse of Allah for believing that Jesus is the Son of God, according to chapter 9, verse 30. And there are also curses of Allah given to the Jews, where Allah transforms the disobedient Jews into apes and pigs, in chapter 2, verse 63 to 65, 5, 59, and 60, and 7, 166, in case you want to check up on me. That is not a position of mutual respect. But if they do not hold to those positions, then they are not being faithful to their own holy book, which they believe is a perfect copy of the perfect and eternal book that has existed forever with God in paradise. But anyway, back to Abraham. They don't read Genesis for Abraham. They read the Quran for Abraham. And remember, Abraham in the Quran is a Muslim. And we see in chapter 60, verse 4 of the Quran, that the Quran tells us, you have a good example in Abraham and his companions. Now, this is very important. It's the same language I told you earlier. Muhammad is the excellent example, according to Quran chapter 33, verse 21. And now we see exactly the same words in Arabic, uswa hasana, the same thing. Abraham is an excellent example. And so this is very important, because as I told you, anything Muhammad says goes. And now they're saying Abraham's the same way. But the Quran qualifies it about Abraham. It doesn't about Muhammad. And so it says specifically that Abraham is an excellent example in this one way. You have a good example in Abraham and his companions when they said to their people, we totally disassociate ourselves from you and from the deities that you worship instead of Allah. We renounce you, and there has come to be enmity and hatred between us and you until you believe in Allah, the one true God. There's come to be enmity and hatred between us and you until you believe in the one true God. That's what Abraham said to his people who were pagans, according to the Quran. And so that's what the Quran is telling Muslims to imitate, that there should be enmity and hatred between them and anybody who does not believe in Allah, the one true God. But then it goes on even more. It says, but you may not emulate. Abraham is not an excellent example. You may not emulate Abraham in his saying to his father, certainly I will pray for forgiveness for you. So you have to hate the unbelievers and not even pray for forgiveness for them like Abraham did. In chapter 5, verse 51 of the Quran says, don't take Jews and Christians as your friends and protectors. So why on earth are these Muslims in the Tri-Faith Initiative, if they take this book seriously as the word of Allah, the perfect, unaltered word of Allah? You know, you have Bibles maybe with the words of Christ in red. If you did the words of God in red in the Quran, it would all be red. He's supposed to have said every bit of it. There's no human element in it. There's nothing like the gospel according to Matthew or according to Mark. It's not God inspiring human beings to give them his word. It's Allah dictating every word to people. And they believe that that is absolutely not negotiable and absolutely perfect for all time, which is fine. It's a sacred scripture, and people tend to believe that about the things that they consider to be sacred scriptures. The problem is that when you have people like in the Tri-Faith Initiative who are being friendly and kind to the unbelievers, you got to wonder, well, do they not know what's in the book, or do they not care what's in the book? Or maybe there's something else going on. Chapter 3, verse 28 of the Quran says, do not take unbelievers as your friends and protectors in preference to believers. Whoever does this has nothing to do with Allah, unless you're doing it to guard yourselves against them. Now, what does that mean, unless you're doing it to guard yourselves against them? So in other words, you can pretend to be the friends of the unbelievers to guard yourselves against them. Ibn Kathir was a great commentator on the Quran. He wrote a tafsir, a commentary on the Quran, which is in the 14th century, which is still widely read today, easily available in English. You can go to the same bookstore when you're stocking up on Maududi and get Ibn Kathir. And Ibn Kathir explains this verse by quoting a companion of Muhammad, one of Muhammad's, you could say, apostles, one of the people who were always around him and following him, one of his early followers. the analogy is not quite exact. Muhammad is the apostle of Allah, according to Islam, and then the people around him, his followers, are his companions. That's the word that's used. But in any case, one of them, Abu Darda, said, this means we smile in the faces of some people, but behind their backs we curse them. We smile in the faces of some people, but behind their backs we curse them. And it is standard Islamic doctrine. Well, let's go to Maududi on it, and he'll tell us what it means. You don't have to believe the Islamophobe. This means that it is lawful for a believer, helpless in the grip of the enemies of Islam and in imminent danger of severe wrong and persecution, to keep his faith concealed and to behave in such a manner as to create the impression that he is on the same side as his enemies. Create the impression that he's on the same side as his enemies. Now, you can say, yeah, but it says severe wrong and persecution, and that's not happening to Muslims. Well, if you ask them, it is. If you read the writings of the Council on American Islamic Relations and the Islamic Society of North America, they'll tell you that there's this terrible tide of Islamophobia and attacks on innocent people, which are, of course, obviously never justified, and discrimination against Muslims in the U.S. This is nonsense, of course. FBI hate crime statistics year after year show that anti-Semitic attacks against Jews are 8 times to 10 times more common than attacks on Muslims, which are way low on the list. Not that even one is justified. But the point is that they are trying to create the popular impression that Muslims are an oppressed, discriminated against minority in the United States because of hysteria over jihad terrorism and inherent racism. And some Muslim leaders have even said that there's a war on Islam in the United States. And so that would be the severe wrong and persecution that can make a Muslim behave as if he were on the same side as his enemies. Now, am I saying definitively that this is what these Tri-Faith Initiative people are doing? Absolutely not. I don't know what's in their hearts. I've never met any of them. The problem is that when you have Muslim Brotherhood involvement, and when you have these doctrines of Islam and this very strong dichotomy in the Quran between believers and unbelievers, the Quran even says in chapter 48, verse 29, Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. Those who follow him are merciful to one another and ruthless to the unbelievers. Then it would be remiss of us, it would be stupid of us to think, oh, well, that can't be happening. There's no possibility of it. At least there ought to be some sober and diligent and searching investigation of what exactly is going on and what is the agenda. Because nothing would advance the program of eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within more effectively than to render us ignorant and complacent in the face of the advancing jihad. And afraid to speak out about it because then you'll be stigmatized like I was in Britain and declared a racist and bigot and Islamophobe for telling the truth. And so people are afraid to tell the truth. I'll close with one very telling story about that. A few years back, there was a jihad plot at Fort Dix, at the Army base. And there was a group of Muslims who were planning to go into Fort Dix and shoot and kill as many American soldiers as they could before they themselves were shot and killed, so that they could claim the Quran's promise of paradise to those who kill and are killed for Allah, which is chapter 9, verse 111. The plot was foiled. The plot was foiled by a 17-year-old guy at a video store. Not by the FBI, not by the cops, by a guy at a video store. Because these plotters, they liked to watch bloody jihad videos. They had beheading videos, they had shootings, they had it all on VHS tapes. And so they took it to the video store and they said, "Can you put these on DVD for us?" And so the kid is working and he's seeing all these horrible images go by. And so he goes to his manager and he says, "Dude," you know how they talk today, these kids. "Dude, I've been seeing some really weird stuff," he didn't say stuff, "on these videos. Should I go to the police or would that be racist?" True story. Because groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations and the Islamic Society of North America, Muslim Brotherhood groups in the U.S., have done such a number on us since 9/11. They've made people afraid. They've made people think, if I speak out, they'll kill me, they'll destroy me, and they will. They'll get you banned from countries. They will slander your name all over the place, so with apologies to Elvis, because you will go online and they will, you search for my name and you'll see all these terrible things that I am and have done. I can't recognize myself in some of them. But I guess I go out at night. But the thing is that is all part of the agenda that is being pursued in the United States by Muslim Brotherhood groups to render it absolutely toxic for anybody to speak out against this, for us to be having this meeting tonight, to make people think it's hateful and racist, like the kid in the video store. He did ultimately go to the cops, by the way. He decided to be racist, and he went to the cops, and the plot was foiled. And so more power to him. But it was close. And it was close because of this Muslim Brotherhood agenda. It is an agenda that is fundamentally in service of a supremacist and violent ideology that denies basic freedoms and basic constitutional principles. And so we have to have the courage to understand that it is happening and is advancing in the U.S. Whatever happens with the Tri-Faith Initiative, CARE and ISNA are two of the most powerful and influential groups in Washington, influencing public policy, and in the media, influencing public perceptions about Islam today. There is nobody who's going to save us from this but us. There is no army. It's not a shooting war. There is no state that is representing it. This is a war of ideas, and our ideas are better, and that's why we will win. We have the truth on our side, and that's why we will win. But it's not a guaranteed victory. You know, God says, the Lord says, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And that we know that in the book of Revelation, everything works out great in the end. But the Lord never gave us a guarantee that Christianity would survive or that free societies would survive in any given area. Egypt that Mark grew up in was 99% Christian before the Arab invasion in the 7th century. Where did all those Christians go? They didn't go anywhere. They're still there. They all became Muslim, not because of the irresistible appeal of Islam, but because it was so hard to live under that subjugated status that they ultimately converted, just to be able to live a decent life. There are people now in the United States who are working to bring that same discrimination, that same harassment, that same misery to all of us and to our children and to our grandchildren. We have to speak out. We have to work with those, you know, there are half the seats here. Where is everybody else? It's up to you to bring them back when we're here next year to talk about the state of things and what we've done in the meantime. Then we'll have this house packed. And we will never give up and never stop standing. But if we don't stand, nobody else is going to stand for us and take care of it. There is no doubt that the truth will prevail. But remember that there is an old saying that pray as if everything depends on God, but act as if everything depends on us. And it's true that Christianity, that the Lord Jesus Christ never says that we should just be passive and wait for him to take care of it all. It is up to us to act, to try to preserve a decent society and future for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and our great-great-grandchildren. If we do not, there's one thing that's certain, is that this brotherhood agenda will continue to advance, and they will be enslaved under it. And so I will leave you with that. It is an unhappy note, but remember, we have to know where we are in order to get where we want to be. And as difficult as it may be, we have to assess the situation honestly and go from there to the place where truth will prevail. And by our efforts and by the help of the Lord, it certainly will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Testimony, I want to introduce to you someone else that has become a good friend and one of the funniest guys actually I've ever met. I wouldn't have ever thought that I would be saying that Robert Spencer is one of the funniest guys that I've ever met, but he actually is. And part of that is, I can tell you, Mark and I do this full time, as does Mr. Spencer. It's a very humorless topic that we deal with. Radical Islam, we could make jokes, but it's a pretty dark topic. So this guy is funny. Anyway, beyond that, he's also a best-selling author. He's written 2 New York Times bestsellers. He's written another 9 or 10 books, 11 books. In fact, this evening there's a book out here that I think we're taking orders for because we actually sold out last night. It hasn't hit Amazon, it hasn't hit Barnes & Noble, any of that kind of stuff. It's a phenomenal book. What's that? We have like one here, and I think that's the last one. Anyway, we are taking orders out in the lobby. So, yeah, they'll definitely be signed and sent. Do you have Robert's signature down pretty good? Okay. So that being said, not only is he a best-selling author, but I think something that I've found interesting about him.
He is the supreme model to emulate. That is very important to understand that when they say he's the excellent example to emulate, that is absolute. If Muhammad did it, it's right. If Muhammad said it, believe it. If Muhammad did it, imitate it. There is nothing that Muhammad did that is wrong as far as Islam is concerned, because the Quran calls him the excellent example, and without any qualification. So, Muhammad said, if anybody changes his religion, kill him. If anybody changes his religion, kill him. If he leaves Islam, kill him. Every last convert from Islam to Christianity, or from Islam to anything, anyone who leaves Islam is under a perpetual death sentence. It may never happen. We can pray to God that it will never happen. But it is always a possibility that a Muslim who leaves Islam could be encountered by somebody who knows that that is the teaching of Islam, believes it to be the word of God, and acts upon it. And so what happened to Mark actually probably would have been much worse had he been at home and walked into his parents' house and said, guess what, Mom and Dad? And makes his way to the store manager, and the store manager says, what's your name, little boy? And he says, Muhammad. And, well, Muhammad, can you tell us what your mommy looks like? And he looks up at the store manager and he says, I have no idea. So, it is, here again, a very different world. And yet it is very important to understand that what you just heard about this vicious hostility that Mark encountered from his loving parents, previously loving parents, only because he had converted from Islam to Christianity, is not something that is eccentric or out of the ordinary. It is not something that is the invention of a tiny minority of extremists who have twisted and hijacked the religion of peace. It is something that is actually mainstream in Islam. Chapter 4, verse 89 of the Quran, the holy book of Islam, says that if there are those who are with you and they turn renegade, then slay them wherever you find them. If they turn renegade, then slay them wherever you find them. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, who is the excellent example of conduct, according to the Quran, chapter 33, verse 21.
That most people, if you Google Roberts, you can find out all kinds of interesting things that you may not have known about Robert Spencer. Some not true, and many of which are not true, absolutely. But one thing that is true is he was actually banned from going to the UK. Now, the fact that a country would ban an individual from coming to that country, not based on any criminal behavior. Anyway, he'll get into that. I find it a fascinating topic, and I know he'll delve into it a little bit. But beyond that, we're thrilled to death to have Robert Spencer here with us tonight. It's a real privilege to have him. So, my friend, Robert Spencer.
Thank you very much. I feel as if it's incumbent upon me to be funny now. And there is actually one way that we can tie all these threads together, because we just heard this very riveting testimony from Dr. Mark Christian that is a glimpse into a world that is so very different from the one in which we live. And that does remind me of a joke, actually, of a little boy, a Muslim boy, 5 years old, and he's in the supermarket with his mother. And as these things will happen, he gets separated from her. And so eventually he's weeping. I converted to Christianity. He might not have walked out again. As he calls up, he gets the more moderate approach, and that is that they tell him they're looking forward to killing him. But they probably would if they had the opportunity, because if they don't, then they themselves will be punished by Allah. So it is very important to understand the Quran and Muhammad, those are the highest authorities in Islam. So the way Mark's parents were acting was absolutely mainstream. And that brings us to the topic that is tonight's topic, the Muslim Brotherhood in the heartland, which is kind of an odd topic if you think about it, because we think of them, if you've heard of the Muslim Brotherhood, you've probably heard about it in the last few years as an Egyptian political party and something that's not really anything to worry about. After all, Barack Obama loves the Muslim Brotherhood. On June 4th, 2009, Barack Obama went to Cairo to make a major speech at Al-Azhar University, which is the foremost institution in Sunni Islam. And he was going to make this speech of outreach to the Muslim world that was going to heal all the terrible breach between the Islamic world and the United States and usher in a new era of peace and harmony